On this week's episode, we interview Kyle Ruth about Masters athletes and what it takes to qualify for quarterfinals.
If you want to upgrade your coaching systems, head over to trainingthinktank.com/movement course. Scroll down to the bottom of the page where you'll be able to get the first section of the course for free.
I totally forgot you had a truck now.
Yeah, I'm a truck guy now.
Tell everyone. Yes.
Should I talk in a deeper voice now that
I'm a man.
I drive a truck.
Tell us what kind of truck you got.
I got the new Ford Maverick.
So you're a Ford truck man?
He's a Ford truck man.
That's all he drives. He ain't got no boundaries.
I got the hybrid.
Toby Keith, right?
Huh? I have no idea.
That commercial slaps.
I have no idea what he's talking about.
Kyle is just staring. You didn't grow up in the South. That's why. That was the only commercial. You know how they can like target different audiences? Yeah. They're like, only country folk will like this.
Yeah, dude, I'm from a tiny town in Indiana.
Well, then you fucked up. Because that's like a gangster 90s commercial. Like they just have the other brands driving by like sucking ass and his Ford truck's killing it.
Because I don't think I had cable until like 2000 or something. I just totally missed this.
It was. Yeah. It's a great song. Toby Keith. You know who Toby Keith is, right?
I'm aware of vaguely surface level.
We went to Nashville for New Year's and we cranked that out on the drive up there. It's only 45 seconds, but it's good.
I don't know why that just reminded me of. So when Jordan and I were dating, we would always go to Longhorns, which is also kind of like a down south kind of thing, right? And we would do their
that's the kind of budget Brannen had.
Yeah. Well, talking about budgets, we only went on Monday nights when they had like their happy hour.
Oh, it got worse.
It was like get a burger and fries for $3.50. That's what.
Well, hey, he's married now with 2 kids, so it panned out.
Clearly, it worked. That's a strategy for everybody.
I mean, you had a place that you went, right?
Yeah. Well, so Haley was diagnosed with celiac disease really early on.
Yeah.
And that was before gluten-free was like
so you couldn't go anywhere
because we've been married for basically forever now.
Forever.
And it was before gluten-free was like a popularized thing. So there were just no restaurants that
does make it so much harder.
Dude, it was impossible. Now it's a little bit easier. A little bit.
That is true.
So you didn't say your restaurant.
There wasn't.
There wasn't one.
He couldn't.
There was one place because we were in Bloomington. There's one place that we could go that like was pretty reliable. You could talk to the waiters and waitresses and be like,
just a local place.
Yeah, it was called The Farm, and it was sick. I mean, they had this bison burger that was just off the charts good, but
it's just like a mom and pop place.
Yeah, it was a little local place there.
They would like completely clean the utensils
and all that.
They
said they would. Whether or not that actually happened,
right?
How did we get on this again?
You were talking about Toby Keith, and Toby Keith would always be on at Longhorns.
Yeah. Wow, what a turn. So Masters, huh?
Truck to Toby Keith to
that's right, man.
The Farm.
I'm a Ford truck man.
I'm a Longhorn man. But only on Monday.
Well, we have Mr. Kyle Ruth back on, and we're going to talk about Masters. A couple weeks ago, we talked about what it takes to make quarterfinals for the individual athletes, and I thought that we should do one with our Masters athletes, and no better person than someone who is a Masters athlete.
Didn't you win something Masters-wise?
He's won quite a few things Masters-wise.
Give us your Wikipedia page.
Okay, well, in 2000, I won Masters Fitness Collective in 2000. It was like the only thing that you could.
Definitely was not 2000.
Oh my God, am I that old that I think that I was competing as a Masters
20 years ago.
No, 2020.
Yeah, 2020.
I won Masters Fitness Collective. The first year they did it.
Yeah.
There's no other competitions that year because it was like the COVID year. Then I won the 2021 Wadapalooza, beating out Julian Cerna, who took second place.
Shots fired.
Just wanted to make sure I put that
out there. What was the point spread on that?
So Julian was second place, and he got first place.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
He was in second place.
Wasn't sure.
What was the point spread? Was it close?
I believe it was like 4 points or something like that.
He's going to be in the comments soon.
Just enough points to ensure that Julian was in second place. Then I finished 13th in the age group semi. And that was kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
And then I just competed.
Julian beat you there?
I don't want to talk about it.
Can't remember my losses.
I think Julian was at the games, if I remember correctly.
I don't know. I don't know if he beat me. I'm not sure. I didn't look at the leaderboard. And then I just took second up at Masters Fitness Collective back in October. Took second to Brian Wong, who won.
Yeah, and a very talented athlete.
He's
awesome.
Is really good.
Yeah. And that's, what I wanted to kind of start with. We're going to talk about the numbers and give some people some background that maybe are new to the Masters divisions. Like if you just came in at 35 or someone maybe that's just starting competing. We have a lot of people that are 45 and like, hey, I really like CrossFit and I want to try this now. I've been in the group. And we'll get to those numbers. But I think the first thing is, what is that transition like? So you were a high-level athlete before Masters. You made regionals multiple times. You were one spot out of making the games, I think maybe in, was it 2013 or 14, yeah. Something like that. Yep. And so you were at the highest level of the sport. You took some time off and then you decided you wanted to compete again when you became a master. So at 35, you get back into the Masters division. What are the main differences that you've seen? I mean, things have changed over the years, but just in general from competing as an individual to competing in a Masters division.
I think one of the first things is that movement quality is a huge advantage as a Masters athlete. I think it mattered less when I was in the younger divisions, but that was also maybe because the sport was so new that like it didn't matter that much in 2013 how good your overhead positions were for your snatch. But as you get further down the line, you can really see, I've watched a lot of the people that compete in some of the older divisions and coached people in some of the older divisions at the games. And there's a huge discrepancy in people that have like good overhead squat or good snatch positions or good muscle up positions, and those who don't. And the longevity of those athletes is a huge factor. But then also just transitioning into, the 35 to 39, it's like, it's almost a weed out process, where people who have good movement quality just can continue to train, can continue to do it. And people who haven't spent time building, good patterns, good positions and things like that, they kind of just fizzle out because of injury or overuse and pain. They're just dealing with pain all the time. So I think that's probably the biggest factor that I found in working with Masters athletes and now, transitioning pretty far into the early Masters stages myself. Yeah. It's that spending time on movement quality and doing the little things that make it so that you can continue to train and compete in a healthy way. That's what makes the biggest difference.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because we didn't talk about your points. I said I was going to ask you that question, but both of us, that too, I think both of us is the number one priority of making sure that people move well, especially in the Masters divisions, because number one of health and longevity. I think that just matters in general. Like we don't want to have pain the rest of our lives. So making sure people are healthy, but then to keep them healthy so that they can train harder throughout the season and then perform well in the season.
I think the other thing, and this is really common, especially when people are aging into the next division, whether that's going from, 34 years old to the 35 to 39, or whether you're transitioning from 54 to the, 55 to 59 division, whatever transition it is, people always tend to think that the next division is going to be a lot easier. And there are a lot of people who were games athletes, right, who transitioned into 35 to 39 and made a really big push to try and make it this past year. They'd been to the games multiple times and did not qualify in the top 10 to go to the CrossFit Games. So It's like the idea that you're going into an easier division, while it may be easier to go to the CrossFit Games in a Masters division than it is in some of the other divisions, they're not easy by any means. Like this is all of the Masters divisions are challenging. Like I'm 2 seasons away from going into the 40 to 44 division, and I'm not looking at that as like, oh man, I can't wait till I get to 40 to 44 because it's going to be easier. That's not the case. Like everybody, first off, the whole cohort that's my age is also going to be aging up at the same time. And the people that are in that 40 to 44 division, it's not like they're just waiting around for themselves to age into the, 45 plus. So it's like, I think people have this concept that it's going to be really easier to qualify for the next stage, whatever that might be for them, quarterfinals, age group semifinals or the games. It's not. It's actually a lot more challenging than people think. And I think so. Even to that point, I think some of the strength requirements may be higher in the early or the younger divisions than they are like to qualify for a semifinal. Yeah. For open level athletes.
Yeah, certainly. To be able to qualify for semifinals and the games in Masters divisions, you have to be very strong relative to your peers. Now, that may be different than the individual division. Like if we're comparing them, there's a 10 to 12% decrease in strength and in, let's just say, rep averages in Metcons based on the individuals into Masters categories, and you can kind of go, we'll flesh that out later on. Yeah. But relative to your peers, as you get older, you need to be much stronger than the averages to be able to be competitive at the higher ends of the sport. So I think that is important. But all of that plays back to movement quality is king when it comes to that, because if you can't get into a good overhead position, you can't snatch as much as you'd like, or at least train it as much as you'd like. If you can't get into a good front rack position, it's really hard to squat clean or, do all the other movements, you name it, like all the gymnastics. And that's the tendency that we see is people get into it and they may have really good engines. They may actually even be really strong, high tension athletes, but because they can't get into the positions that they need to express their fitness, they can't qualify for quarterfinals or semifinals or beyond.
To that point as well, I think one of the things that happens to you as you age, at least this has been my own personal experience, so I'm assuming this is going to happen to everybody, but I can't train with the same frequency that I used to. I can't go heavy on my squat cleans or my snatches or, train with as much intensity in my Metcons as I used to as frequently. I can still go there, right? I can still ramp up. And I used to say, I think we did a Masters podcast in 2020 right after MFC. And I said, I don't think I'll ever hit any PRs. Well, I have since hit some PRs in the last 2 years in training, but it's come through a very different style of training, way lower frequency, because what I found is when I train with higher frequency, then I just get hurt more often, which means that I can't make progress. Right. So I think that's really what it comes down to is finding like what your optimal training frequencies are. How often can you squat heavy? And for those higher tension athletes that you were talking about, they may be even just on maintenance strength programs where it's like, they should not expect to get stronger over the next, 4 or 5 years, especially this is, early masters stages. But like if they're already at the top end of the strength, maybe they should just be doing maintenance work so that they're not.
Hey-o.
That was weird.
That's all right. Our audio only listeners can still hear us.
Yeah, we just had some strange light happenings.
It's interesting that you bring that up because there are some people that get into the sport late that have maybe a high chronological age. Maybe they are 50, right? Or whatever. Right. But they have a low training age. Those people may be able to quote unquote, adapt to certain movements just because they haven't done those before. So yes, they will PR and they will improve. But then there are people like you who have been doing it for 15 years. It's going to be very hard for you to improve your snatch as far as the actual number goes. But you could still be really good at the sport if you maintain that for the next 5 years, because most people are decaying a little bit. And I say that on purpose because everyone gives Max a hard time, but that is the process of, we are just trying to minimize that quote unquote decay or deterioration as much as we can. And it's okay to think about your training that way. That's not a loser mindset. It's I want to keep Kyle as strong and as malleable as possible and have all the skills so that he can continue to crush it for the next 5 or 10 years. And if he does that, then Kyle's a winner in 40 to 44 or even 35 to 39, because most people are falling off the wagon because they're going too hard in the Masters division.
Well, I think the biggest obstacle that people are running up against is the fact that they think they need to train like younger athletes as Masters athletes. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge that they're running up against. And so they run up against injury after injury. So it's like, they'll have a tweak or they'll have a strain and they recover from that finally. And then, they get into a training groove and they go 3 or 4 weeks and they're like pushing just like they would have when they were younger. And then boom, the next tweak happens and now they have to deal with that. And so they never get these like long extended training blocks where they just get quality training in, you know what I mean? Where they're trying to push too hard, too fast. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that Masters athletes are facing.
Yeah. And that all circles back to the making sure that you're staying on top of your movement. And that's something we've tried to prioritize with all our individual clients, and the same thing in our online programs, but it's hard, right? As a Masters, as a younger athlete, if you're doing CrossFit, there is a inherent risk to get tweaks when you're doing things like squat cleans and squat snatches for time or any other movement that you're going fast. But making sure you're staying on top of your recovery, making sure that you're doing things well in your warm up and cool downs will help prevent some of that.
Well, and that's especially true. The frequency of tweaks and injuries is going to be higher when people are pushing at their limits, which is what's required to make, adaptations, to make progress. And even when you're a Masters athlete, the difference is that your limit is just a little bit lower. Your volume limit and your, intensity frequency limit is just a little bit lower than it was. Max used to say something like you only get so many kicks at the bucket, meaning you only get to go like all out a certain number of times. And the older that I've gotten, the fewer number of times that I can take a kick at the bucket before something happens.
Did you try to push past that, or did you just instantly were like, I have so much awareness that I'm not going to or did you have some moments where you're like, screw this aging, I'm going for it? I
would love to say that I had so much awareness and that I had gone past my ego, but that's total bullshit. When I was competing on the team, I was 36, I think, when we were at the cross, maybe 37 when we were at the cross. I don't remember. Anyway, I had multiple tweaks throughout the season. Popped rib, which I've got right now. I did in the workout that we were doing before this. So like, yeah, I'm always trying to push to find the limits. And I encourage my clients to do the same within, within their bounds and within, what's kind of good training or intelligent training, because that's really what pushes you to go further. Like, I'm not trying to, and this is probably the mindset that most masters competitors should have. I'm not in the masters division just to be here.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I'm trying to get better, and maybe I'm not going to be able to get better than I was when I was, 27 or 28 or 30, but I'm still going to try. Like, what's the harm in trying to find out? Like, I might get a tweak here or there, but as long as I'm smart and intelligent and, take care of my movement, follow the movement mobility path that we've got, which I love. I tell all my masters athletes to follow, like, do that stuff and then see how far you can take it.
For sure. I agree. Let's dive into some of these numbers, because I think that's where people, they click on this and they want to know, what does it take to make a quarterfinal? And the one thing, we talked about this with our individuals, it's going to continue to change, right? Because the tests dictate who gets in. It could be biased one direction or biased another direction, and that will change. Like, if it's all strength-based work, well, then the stronger athlete, you're going to have to just be able to show up and hopefully hit those numbers. If it's all body weight or engine-based work, maybe the athlete that's a little bit smaller, what CrossFit used to call the ninja athlete, will probably do a little bit better. So you got to keep that in mind, and these are based on the averages. Like, we're looking at, okay, who has qualified over the last 2 years since we've had the quarterfinal standard, the age group quarterfinal, and what have the tests look like, and then what type of athlete is getting in. So just keep that in mind. I think that these are just kind of, again, this is the foundation, and then you can kind of identify the skills that you need after that.
You really do sound like you were played at 2 times speed.
Sorry.
No, it's perfect.
Brannen's excited.
Speed you up.
Brannen is excited about numbers.
It's not even the speed, actually. It's just you have that tone that sounds like you are actually sped up at 2 times speed.
My question is, okay, so the last 2 years we've had the shortened open, right? How much has that impacted the numbers here? And also, it used to be that it was top 200. So people in the Masters division who are top 200 level or maybe top 400 level athletes are probably going way harder when it was top 200, and now some of those top level athletes have maybe, scaled back the intensity a little bit so that they can be prepared. How much do you think that's affected these numbers?
Well, with less tests, it's more important that you can crush the ones that are given to you.
Right.
However, because now it's more than the top 200, it's easier to get away with a bad test, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, in the 35 to 39, there were 2,200 women that made it out of the top 10%, which is much more. I mean, it's 10 times more than the top 200, right? And then for the men, it was 3,074 men that qualified in the top 10% to go to quarterfinals. So now it's much more broad and there's more wiggle room. But I do think for the well-rounded athlete, you probably want more tests. You probably want 5 so that you can expose all of the other people that have weaknesses on something like a ring muscle up or handstand walk that may come out that they aren't as good at as maybe you, or like if a rope climb came out, you would love that in the open. There are many masters athletes, even in the 35 to 39 division, that would hate that in the open.
Right.
Yeah. So if we're looking at those numbers, I think it does give you more room than you think. The tendency for most people is they get into it and they panic. They're like, I have to crush every single workout. And so the first thing I always say, even with 3 weeks, don't get frustrated if week 1 doesn't go well. Many people get into the first week. They're waiting on Thursday night for the workout to be released. It comes out, and it's something that they hate. It's the wall walk. I hate wall walks. I don't want to do these. I'm going to suck at it. But it's okay, because you can have a bad score, and you can still qualify in the top 10%. So that's kind of I think the first thing that people need to realize is don't give up. Get all 3 scores in, and they may average out to where you get into the top 10%.
Well, I think to your point that people are – they see the workout and they're like, oh, that's a thing that I hate. I mean, the statistical probability that something that you hate is going to show up at least in one of the 3 workouts, unless you're like a Rich Froning or
exactly
someone like that, like the statistical probability is extremely high. So just anticipate that, right? So like before, you even get started, just know that the numbers are not in your favor, that something that you don't like or something you're not good at or a skill that you probably need to continue to develop is going to come up. Yeah. And just be okay with that to begin with.
And to that point, this is something we talked about when we were talking about skills a few weeks ago, but these are things that you should be identifying months in advance. Now, a new movement may come out that you're just not aware of, don't know how to pace, don't know how to handle. You practice that a couple days before.
Probably really true this year too, just because the equipment list is expanded so much from previous years. So there's probably, I don't want to say higher risk, but there's a higher risk that new movements are going to show up and that you could get exposed because you just didn't think of, you know, mixed grip, kettlebell, walking lunges or something, you know, something weird like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So that will be the same for everyone. Everyone's going to be exposed to that new movement. But the other ones, you should be looking at previous open performances, previous training sessions, looking at your peer group. If you're in our individual programs or our online programs, everyone now can be housed on the same leaderboard with things like our throwdown, which is awesome. So you can look at that and say, well, I'm not very good at these couple of movements when they're comboed together. Like I usually finish in the top 20 and now I'm at 80th or something like that.
Right.
And then you can start to identify with your coach or with the coaches in our online program compete to figure out how to handle that in the off season. I think that is also very important. So you should be ready for the movements that come out that we know will come out because you're working on those all year round.
What are the movements that people, I mean, I know I have a list in my head, but I know that you've spent a lot more time breaking down the sport and breaking down the numbers. What are the movements that are almost like guaranteed based on past history? Because we do know that there's a different programming bias and everything now, but based on past history, what does that look like?
Yeah. So the movements that have been most commonly tested would be the toe to bar, chest to bar, burpee, which is actually more than any other movement. It hasn't been in every open, but it was programmed twice in one open, and so that's why it caught up.
Unfortunately, I remember that.
Yeah, double unders, which has been in every single open, so I think that's important to have. And then the big separators now, they haven't been in every open, but just in general looking at separation is the muscle up, especially in masters categories, and the handstand push-up.
Both kinds of muscle ups, bar and rings?
Both kinds, and both kinds have been tested over 10 times in the open over the last 12 years. So you need to be good at both of those. Now, the nice thing about the masters categories as you age, you don't have to be able to finish, let's say, a ring muscle up workout or be able to even do one ring muscle up to qualify in the top 10% historically. In the individual categories now, you have to have a muscle up to be able to get in the top 10%, which we talked about a couple weeks ago.
Right.
Masters is not the case other than 35 to 39 men. But now you're noticing that is getting the field is getting so deep that each year that muscle ups are programmed, you have to be a little bit better than the year before. So that is something that if I'm prioritizing for a masters athlete, like this, especially with our younger, 35 to let's just say like 50, you need to be practicing ring muscle ups, you need to be practicing bar muscle ups and strict handstand push ups.
You know what's interesting? When I coached teen athletes, I found the exact same thing, that working with teen athletes and building some of those keystone or kind of, unlocking skills like muscle up, ring muscle ups, bar muscle ups, and handstand walking was a huge separator, not necessarily in the open, but when they got into the age group quarterfinals level, that just being really proficient in those things, just spending 2 days a week, really developing those skills gave them a huge separator. And I think that that's now starting to become the case for masters divisions almost across the board.
Yeah, it's hugely important.
What are and I don't know if you have this off the top of your head or in front of you, but what are the volume numbers for like the 55 to 59-year-old, males and females for ring muscle ups? That's something I coach 2 athletes that were female athletes that are in 50 to 54 and 55 to 59 that are games level athletes. And I know what they can do, but I don't know what the field can do relative to.
Yeah, that is such a good question. And actually to start, I'll try to get Chris, if we can, we'll link it's actually a behind the scenes one we did for the classroom, but I think it'll just be a good free ad for all those masters athletes. I did a deep dive 2 years ago on the different numbers, and those probably need to be upgraded, so maybe I'll do that at some point, and we can post that again, but we'll link that below, and you can actually look at the numbers as opposed to me just guessing off the top of my head. But the nice thing about the open is 55 plus, we haven't seen ring muscle ups or some of the more advanced skills. So it's more important that you're really good at pull-ups and chest to bar pull-ups. Like last year in the workout, the modification for the last workout was pull-ups and chest to bars as opposed to it being finishing with bar muscle ups.
Right.
However, at the semifinal level, they have tested those things. And so that means that there is a huge separation for those that are proficient at bar and ring muscle ups in the older divisions. So if you're an aspiring semifinal or above masters athlete in 55 plus, that is something that needs to be in your program, not necessarily all year round, because especially if you have bad shoulder positions or bad overhead positions. You need to work on that first, just so that you can have health and longevity. But it needs to be something that you are working on continuously. And then for those that are at the top of the sport, they should have some endurance in those positions, because you have to be able to do 5 to 10 reps in a workout and do them relatively fast.
It's almost like the older you get, the more important those kind of keystone skills become to moving on. It's almost like the engine, in 35 to 39, your engine matters a ton, because everyone's really fit. Everyone's everyone that's competing the higher end of the levels is pretty strong. Everyone's good at muscle ups. Everyone's good at handstand. Like, they're all good at all the pieces. But when you get into some of the older divisions, it's almost like if you're good at those keystone skills, it gives you this huge advantage when they show up in, say, age group quarterfinals workouts or age group semifinals workouts. And so the engine doesn't matter as much. But for those divisions, what you're saying is that it does matter more for the open. Getting into that division. And there's a lot fewer, you said there were over 3,000 people that qualified in 35 to 39 male masters division.
But only 440 in the 55 to 59 division. So
that's a huge difference.
It's a totally different ball game, and it means it's much tighter to get in. Think about it this way. The individual competition, you'll get 150,000 men that sign up for it, and top 10% goes, right? So you get, let's just say 15,000 across the world go. But of those 150,000, there are probably 100,000+ that are just signing up because they're in the gym. They don't care about performance. They're not focused on it. Almost every single masters athlete that signs up cares about performance. So it's a much deeper field. Even though it's a smaller field, they're good all the way across the board, other than maybe the bottom 10%. So there are a lot of really good athletes in the field, as opposed to it being you're really only fighting against the top 20,000 or 30,000 in the open for individual competition.
So when you do get to those older divisions, your engine matters, because it actually is more of a challenge to qualify in the top 10%. I mean, I know it's still 10% of the division, but it's a bigger challenge because there's just a way smaller pool.
This is the interesting thing, and I actually talk about it in the video, so I'll definitely make sure that we link that. But with the 55 and older, both male and female, the open is more about how fast can you move, because all the loading is lighter. So you got to keep that in mind. Instead of the 50-pound dumbbell for men, now you're using a 35-pound dumbbell. But that doesn't mean, it's not because they're just weaker, right? Because a lot of those guys now are actually pretty strong. That they have to move it faster. So the movement speed, they actually need to match or be a little bit faster than a lot of the older divisions that are using a 50-pound dumbbell. And then the same thing's true for something like, let's say, instead of a pistol, guess what they're doing? Box step-ups with no weight a lot of times. Those have to be very fast. You can't just step up slowly and walk to the other side and step off. Like those, it's essentially where you're doing body weight metcons for 12 minutes or 15 minutes, and you have to be able to go the entire time. So yes, engine in the open, the stage 1, matters a ton. But then we go to stage 2, and now it's more skill-based. So it's less about the engine. It's more about your strength numbers, which we'll talk about, and hugely about the skills, the ring muscle-ups, bar muscle-ups, handstand walking, anything else that may be thrown out.
Which is a giant contrast to 35 to 39, 40 to 44 divisions, where a balanced athlete, balanced fitness is required to move on to any stage.
Yeah.
You've got to be strong enough. You've got to be skilled enough. You've got to have enough of an engine, but being too biased in any one of those areas isn't going to get you through.
Yeah, exactly. So let's walk through some of these just to give the audience an idea of like where you should place looking at last year's open workouts. So starting with the 35 to 39 male division, there were 3,074 men that qualified in the top 10%. And I think it was something like 1,800 actually did the quarterfinals. Part of that was, I think they charged, do you remember what it was for Masters? $50 or something like that. So the people that knew that they weren't.
It's also a challenge just because the quarterfinals is like, it was 4 days, started on Thursday. You had, so like logistically, it can be a challenge for people.
Yeah, for sure. So the total point value for someone that finished 3,074th was around 10,800 points, meaning that you could accumulate over those 3 workouts 10,800 points, which would be, let's just call it 3,600-ish places on average across those workouts. Now, the nice thing about it is maybe, let's say Kyle Ruth's doing the workouts. The first one has, rope climbs, ring muscle ups. You crush that, you get top 10 in the world.
What a horrible combination of movements.
The next one comes out. It's something else that Kyle loves. He crushes it. He gets top 10. The third workout comes out, and he hates all the movements. And let's just say
strict
that
parallel handstand push-ups.
yeah. And, he tweaks his back, he tweaks his shoulder, and he can only finish a couple reps. You could still get away with maybe a 10,000th place finish there because you finished top 10 in the world in the first two. So that goes back to the point of, like, if you have one bad workout, it's okay. These are just averages where you probably want to be to make sure that you qualify. Most athletes on the Masters division, you'll notice that they're really good at one or two things. So, like, I ran through these numbers multiple times. There are a lot of athletes that is like 250th, 280th, and then like 4,000th because they just have that workout that they're not good at. So it's okay to have that workout, but if you want to get better and better, qualify for a semifinal, you need to be good at all of those things.
Broad time and modal domain, right?
Yeah, exactly. So for event one, to be able to average that, let's say 3,600th place, you need to be at 8 rounds plus 3 wall walks plus 6 snatches. So let's just say just under 9 rounds, and that would easily get you into the top 10%. Now, there were athletes that qualified that only did 6 rounds or 7 rounds because they did better in the other workouts, but that would be a good target for a workout like that. So you still need to have a really good engine. You got to be able to do wall walks fast, the dumbbell snatch, so you need to have good posterior chain endurance, and you need to be able to jump, which is like a new stepping stone for Masters athletes. In the past, there haven't been a ton of box jumps, but now I think something that we may see.
Look at the age group semifinal. I know that's not the topic of this podcast, but I think we had 120 30-inch box jumps last year. And if you're if you're not 6 feet tall, you can't step down from there, right? Your only option is to rebound. But
right.
Another discussion.
On the female side for event one, it was 7 rounds plus 6 box jumps. So a little bit lower. The female side, the field isn't as deep at the back end. So I think that's important to note. But the front end on the female side in all the Masters categories is still really deep. So to get into like the top 3 or 4%, there are just a lot of amazing female athletes. It's just that 15 to 25% range is just not quite as deep as all the men that are competitive in that range.
Here's a question for you. How does the smaller field influence how people move on to, it's top 30 to go to the age group semi from age group quarters? How does, having a field of 400, is the 55 to 59 female division even smaller than that?
Yeah. So that they had 330 people.
So basically you're going top 10% and then top 10% again. Yeah. Like that, man. I've never really given that enough thought and given it enough credit how much more challenging that really is than, in my division where there's tons of people competing for the spot, but also gives you all this point separation.
Right. And I have told multiple Masters athletes that are fighting for that and have been on the bubble the last couple of years of like, look, especially in the older divisions, it's really tough. And when you get into quarterfinals, which we'll talk about in a later episode, that's where everything has to be dialed in and you can't make mistakes. In the open, you can make some of those mistakes, but again, in quarterfinals, especially with those older divisions where you're competing against 300 people, like you have to make sure that everything is dialed in because the top of the field is so good.
Let's say, okay, we just walked through some of the numbers for the first open workout. Let's say you're a Masters athlete and you got through the first workout and that was your weakest one. And you're sitting outside of that 3,600th average that you were talking about. Would you repeat that as a coach of a Masters athlete that's in the, say 45 to 49 division? Do you repeat something like that? Or do you say, hey, relax, there's, at least 2 more scores coming out, maybe 3 more scores, depending on the structure of the open, and relax and trust that the numbers are there?
I think I would have a legitimate conversation with the athlete. I think a lot of that is based off of their own emotional awareness. Like, is this going to mess you up for the other 2 workouts because you're so frustrated, or are you going to be more focused and dialed in? And also what was tested. If it was a strength and they didn't do well, then I think for sure they need to retest that. If it was something like, I know that wall walks, snatches, and box jumps, that's going to be my worst workout, and we know that ring muscle-ups will still come out or bar muscle-ups and I'm going to crush that, then it's okay. Let's move on. But for most athletes, I think it's easy to say, let's move on, and most of them still end up retesting.
Definitely true.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what would you do? That's a better question. So you're competing. You wouldn't be in that spot, but let's say you are in that spot from quarterfinals to go to semifinals. What are you doing?
I would probably repeat it. At 37 years old, I would definitely repeat it, right? Yeah. Like, I don't see any reason that I wouldn't try and put my body through that. I can't imagine if I were 10 years older or 20 years older in the same position, if I would necessarily want to put my body through that much more stress again. But at the same time, the workouts are adjusted as you do age. And so, by the time I would be 57, I'd be doing maybe more of a lighter weight. And so maybe it's not as demanding on I don't know. I don't think that, I don't want to say that like, hey, it's lighter, so it's less demanding on the body, because I've watched people, I've coached people in the 55 plus. They're going so fast in those workouts. It's not less demanding. So I think that's a really tough question. It's very individual.
What you just said is actually something I've been thinking about a lot. It's like the demand is probably very similar. And I'm not sure if it should be, if it's a good thing or a bad thing for the sport, and just the way that it's programmed in general for the Masters categories. Like, how can we promote health and longevity while still giving really good tests? But that's probably another podcast. It's something that I've thought about a lot, and like, how can we make the Masters programming more efficient, better, but also to promote it? Because the one challenge, I mean, you see this at the games, right? Like, the Masters is an afterthought at this point. And I get it. Part of it is like, this is where the money is and this is what people want to watch. But if we want to pour anything into this, or we want to make it grow, like, we've got to think about it a little bit more. And hopefully the new, with Bosman programming, we'll think about that more. We'll be a little bit more thoughtful about how things are programmed. So for that second workout, just kind of fly through some of these. That cut line would have been 160 reps for the men at 35-39. So that would be coming back down. Remember, this was the deadlift and burpee.
1 up to 10 back down to 1.
Correct. So you would have finished the round of 7 and then been into 1 or 2 deadlifts in that round of 6.
That's pretty far into that workout.
It is far.
It's over the hill.
Exactly.
Which was the hard part for that workout.
And this was something that I actually talked to Max about when we did the individual podcast. That workout was so tight, anywhere from 8% to like 14%. So if you're looking at it, a couple reps on the deadlifts, I think, because at that point, as all of us know that did it, like, it was just, you were blown up. Your back is blown up. The burpees felt like it was taking you 10 seconds per rep. So one rep was like 150 spots. And then another rep was another 150 spots. So there was such a big difference there.
That's going to be true of any low rep workout, right? Like 160 reps for an open workout. You've done the analysis on this. That is an extremely low volume open workout. The density was so high, which is why it was, blew everyone's back up so bad and people were so trashed. But anytime you get a workout that's going to be low volume or low total rep counts, like, people say every rep counts and it's cliche, but like in that one, clearly every rep counts a ton, right? It's like every rep's worth 50, 60 places. And when you're looking at, what does it take to get into the top 10%, 2 reps, 2 burpees, right? Which is at that pace, probably about 1 burpee every 4.5 seconds. So it's 9 seconds of work to have given yourself 100 places in a workout.
Yeah.
Damn.
And for the females, it was 8 deadlifts, working your way back down, and then you're into the next round of deadlifts. So you're probably 5, 6, or 7 deadlifts in. That was kind of like the range to be able to get to that top 3,600. So pretty similar, again, from male to female. There's a little bit of a drop-off when we're talking about 10%, but if you look at the top-end scores, just as a reminder for those that are trying to be really competitive, they're very similar from male to female.
Now, were those numbers pretty similar across divisions from...
so
40 to 44 all the way up to the 60 plus?
That's such a good question, and this is something that I think it's going to continue to change. The older divisions are getting closer and closer and closer to the numbers that the 35 to 39 are putting up, other than the strength numbers. Those are still pretty far. Not far, but they haven't changed over the last 4 or 5 years. In general, on average, it was a 7 to 10% drop-off from each of the open workouts. So if, let's just say you did 100 reps from 35 to 39, it was around, let's say, 90 to 93 reps for the highest score in the next one on average. And then in strength, it's anywhere from 8 to 12%. So you can expect, if you're just looking at this, and again, it will change because as the guys Kyle's going against right now, there are a lot of strong guys. As they age up into 40 to 44, I imagine a few of them will probably still be lifting close to what they're lifting now, and that will change the metrics. And the same thing's true for, you look at all these young guys that are now, I mean, gosh, people were like front squatting 400-something pounds at Wadapalooza. They'll age up into 35, and they'll probably still be pretty close to that. So these numbers will just keep increasing, and it's going to be more and more impressive.
Join the club. Brian Wong, 430 at the games.
Exactly.
In Masters Division.
It's insane.
People are so strong.
Right. So you can, if you're looking at aging up, you can just kind of do that basic metric of, okay, if I finished this and I got in the top 10% at 8 rounds, there's about a 7 to 10% drop off when I go into the next division. But I would be closer to that 5%. Like, that would be my goal. And that's what I tell my athletes. You need to be 3 to 5% deterioration from age group to age group, and that means you are doing A-okay. Like you're right where you need to be. If you're close to that 10%, that means you're just hitting the averages, and that's probably dangerous because the averages will continue to improve.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is we do know that the sport, because it's still so young, especially the Masters divisions are young in the sense that they haven't had them for the entire duration of the sport. And so there's a lot more progress being made in the Masters division. The other thing I think is that coaches in general are figuring out how to coach Masters athletes more and more effectively, more so than people are at a faster rate than people are figuring out how to coach younger athletes, because they kind of already have a pretty good system for that.
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like we need like two different names though. Like I know they have the ages on Masters, like 35 to whatever. But I feel like if I was a Masters and I was into like the 50, 60, I'd be listening to this like, you know.
What? So the really
there's
young
such a
ones
difference.
are like,
We need like Silver Fox division. We need like a name division, something. Because we say Masters Chris, as if it's all this.
Chris just get us canceled.
So different.
I will say
Silver
this.
Fox is a bad thing.
I'm fucking around, Chris.
The worst division to be in, and I feel for all these people, is 50 to 54. Because historically, there hasn't been any change in loading, and they're still doing the same workout that Kyle Ruth, who is in his 30s, is doing. There's a 20-year age or 18-year age gap in many of those, and somehow they are still expected to be able to just crush those. So it makes no sense to me, and I hope that they did change it for the quarterfinal and semifinals last year. So I hope that they do that this year in the Open.
I'm laughing over here because I coach a female who is at the end of the 50 to 54 division. So she's 54 for this season. And she would echo that sentiment. She cannot wait to go and use some lighter weights to go, to go use her engine a little bit more.
I mean, so please use the same weights as Justin Medeiros and Tia Toomey. It literally makes zero sense that CrossFit has never changed that. And it's something that I've actually reached out multiple times and asked, like, what's the reason for this? And you don't hear anything back. But it's an interesting thing to think about, like what would change in as far as trajectory goes for training, and how would you prepare those athletes? How many more athletes would stay healthy throughout the year? Because now you're telling, the female athlete that they have to do squat clean thrusters at 115 pounds because that's what is programmed in the Open. It's a very challenging place to be in.
For my Masters female at that age range, we spend almost all of our time on strength because that's the separator for someone who
becomes a strength workout.
Who has all the skills. Every workout is just a strength workout because they're all so heavy. Yeah. But that's, again, for a programming conversation about Masters athletes.
For sure. So the last workout, just to give to close that conversation of what it would look like to get there, for Masters 35 to 39, you had to be able to do muscle-ups. Every other division, if you didn't have muscle-ups, you could still stay within the cut line, but that would mean that you'd have to do really well on the other workouts. So workout 3, as a reminder, last year was double under thruster with increasing loads, and then it finished with bar muscle-ups. You still did some thrusters after, but there were bar muscle-ups in the workout. If you're a male in the 35 to 39 division, you just have to have that skill. That's where it is the biggest separator. So for those males that maybe have really good engines, maybe you're even really strong, but you just don't have the skill of a bar or a ring muscle up, that's something that you should identify now and start working on that before the Open so that you can get in.
Yeah, I think there's no question that if you're trying to qualify for quarters, even if muscle ups or ring muscle ups or bar muscle ups don't show up in the Open, you can guarantee they're going to come in quarters. It's like one of those things that it's like, it's guaranteed that you will be doing that movement. And I think handstand walking may be a very similar thing to that. At some stage, if you continue to qualify on, you're going to be doing ring or bar muscle-ups. You're going to be doing handstand walking. And if you don't have those skills, then spending the time, having a good, structured program to guide you to getting those skills and spending time, even at the expense of building your engine or getting a great workout, one day, just spend time building those skills. That is like, I think it's absolutely critical if you're trying to move on at all.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, what's the point of even having this conversation about moving on to quarters if you're going to get to quarters and can't do workout number 2 that has, 10 ring muscle ups at the end of it.
Yeah. Or any of the other, you talked about handstand walking or rope climbs or, for the younger divisions, GHDs, like those are all things that you need to think about in your training.
Plenty of GHD setups in age group last year as well.
And if you're not programming those throughout the year, you're not training those, then it comes at a risk if you do it in the workout. I'm not a huge fan of GHD sit-ups in general, but I know that our athletes have to have those in their training, because then you're putting them at an even higher risk by just saying go and do 120 in a workout where they're going to go all out and then just be completely wrecked after.
Yeah, and their volume beforehand was what, at like 40 or 50? Because that,
right.
You know, the first year they did GHDs, they kind of like gave everyone the warning with the equipment list. And so I was giving people GHDs in like a 60 to 75 volume range, and then 120 came out. I'm like, yeah, really? Like, you could have given people a legit warning before this, because I mean, GHDs are notorious for rhabdo, right? Like all the, you go to your level 1, at least when I did my level 1, which is a long time ago. You know, they were telling you the story about the people getting rhabdo from doing GHD sit-ups, right? And then here we are doing 120 in quarterfinal.
Interesting process there. Yeah. And then the last piece for the female side, 35 to 39, the cut line was 7 bar muscle ups. So that still means that you have to be able to cycle those under fatigue in a workout. So assume that you should be able to do more than 1 or 2 unbroken to be able to cycle those in a workout. However, you could get away in the female division with not doing a muscle up in that workout and still qualifying, but it again means that you would have to crush workouts 1 and 2. So I think just in general, the younger divisions, especially if you want to get from quarter or the open into quarterfinals, you need to have good ring muscle ups, good bar muscle ups, good handstand push-ups, good handstand walking, because those skills are going to continue to be tested, and just having the ability to do that under fatigue will allow you to easily get in, as opposed to standing there on the cut line.
You know, there's so many movements in the sport that people can get lost, right? It's like there's so many things that they need to get better at. But I think when you put it like that there are, I call them keystone skills, that there are just this subset of skills that are absolutely essential to you moving on. A good example is like kipping pull-ups, right? Like you can say whatever you want about kipping pull-ups or chest or, you know, butterfly chest to bar or kipping chest to bar. But if you don't have that skill, you're not moving on. Right? And the same can be said now going down the line. Bar muscle ups. Now that rings are re-included in the equipment list for the open, ring muscle ups are probably in that list. Handstand walk. And like, there's so much stuff to train, but in the end, you can boil it down to, well, if you don't have these things, then the only things that you need to train are these. The same can be true from a strength perspective. You can look back at, you know, the loads that were used over the last few years and figure out what the base loads for every lift are. If you can't hit those, what's the point of doing, you know, engine work and things like that if you can't meet the minimum requirements of the sport?
Yeah, so I think we would agree on the 2 things that matter most would be your actual strength metrics, because that is such a limiting factor for many masters athletes, and then the gymnastic skills. And both of those things are kind of one and the same at that point, right? Like you need to be strong enough to do a ring muscle up or to do a handstand push up. And so working on your strength will only help with that. Now, if it's just a technical fault, like I don't know how to swing on the rings, or I don't know how to, you know, get into a pike in the bar muscle up, then you could work on the technical aspects of that. But I think the foundation for most people will be, am I strong enough to pull myself over the bar or over the rings or press away on my head upside down to do a handstand push up?
Well, you know, by the time this podcast comes out, it's probably too long to layer on strength, right? Sure. So it's not like your best bet when you're listening to this podcast, if you don't have the minimum strength requirements in something like a snatch or a clean and jerk, are to improve your technical foundation so that you can express more of the strength that you already have in those 2 lifts. And the same can be true, you know, for ring muscle ups, bar muscle ups, handstand walking. Your best bet is technical work.
Sure.
Right now is to spend time with technical work. But, you know, once the season's over, if those were glaring weaknesses for you, then you go into the training process, which is where it takes time to build, you know, foundational strength, your squatting strength, your overhead strength, or whatever it might, you know, your weighted chest to bar pull up, right? Yeah. Most people are just training weighted pull ups, but you know, one of the things I've found, you know, if you're someone that lacks the skill of a ring muscle up, building chest to rings, weighted chest to rings pull-up strength, man, that helps people turn them over so much easier. It's just that extra, you know, 4 or 5 inches of closing distance between, you know, the rings and the chest or the bar.
And that's the hardest part.
It is
super challenging.
But the people who are good at that, man, they can do strict muscle. They're good at it. And when I mean good, they can go over their body weight, you know, 10, 15, 20 pounds over their body weight for a weighted strict chest to rings or chest to bar pull up. They can turn over strict. And if you can turn over strict, then you can learn the skill of kipping on top of it.
Yeah. So I think big picture is when you get into the off season, that needs to be a priority for everyone. Even if you already are strong, I think it's just a better training plan to get away from some of the hard metabolic stuff as a master's athlete, at least less frequency of that, as Kyle alluded to earlier, and focus more on the skills and the strength aspects, especially the glaring weaknesses that may come up in the open quarterfinals. If you make it to semifinals, you have all this data now, and you can look at it and say, where did I do well against my peers, and where did I do poorly, and identify those things and get to fixing them for the next year.
The other thing I always think is important is, where did I do well, where did I do poorly, and where did I get lucky? I look at, like we talked about at the beginning, I took 13th in the age group semi, but there were no strict handstand push-ups in there.
Right.
And with that field, and especially given where my strict handstand push-ups were then, because I had a minor shoulder tweak, I would have gotten demolished. I'd have been 20th.
Yeah, that's
right?
such a good point.
And you can't just look at what came out and be like, okay, this is the only set of things that I needed to get better at, because I just got lucky that my biggest weakness in the sport didn't show up, or else I would have dropped even further.
Yeah, that takes some reflection. So you have to be honest about what you're good at. And I also think that's where a coach can help, right? Having someone that can objectively look at your numbers and say, hey, look, this may not have come out, but if it did, we probably would have been screwed here. So let's get to work on it.
I mean, that's such a good point. There's a reason that I continue to pay Adam Rogers to write my training and be objective about what I need to do, because I've coached games athletes, I've coached masters games athletes, teens and teams and all this stuff, but it is so much harder to be objective with yourself than it is with someone else.
Yes, it is.
Like if I were writing my own training, I would be so good at muscle ups and rope climbs and heavy back squats and squat cleans and jerks. And that would be, and the ergs. And then everything else in the sport, I would be
I'm going to leave that on the side here.
Yeah, I'll just hope it doesn't show up, right?
But it will.
The number one rule of CrossFit is whatever you're worried about showing up is guaranteed to show up. Yeah. I've only gotten lucky like 2 times in my entire CrossFit career, one of them being last year.
So we talked about the 35 to 39. Kyle asked that question about like, what can you expect as far as like, where are the other divisions? And instead of going through and talking about those numbers, I think a good average would be that 7 to 10% on most Metcons. You can always pull this up. Like, it's so nice having all of that on the games leaderboard. You can go and look yourself. Like if you're in 40 to 44, go and look, get an idea of where you should be, and then start practicing that. And let's say you do one of our throwdowns that's similar to an open workout. You can see like, oh, I did much better than last year, or that wasn't very good. I would have been right on the cut line, and start practicing that before the open or before quarterfinals. That 7 to 10% drop, though, I think is a pretty good average to play off of. And the same thing's true with your strength numbers. The average for Masters 35 to 39 in the complex 2 years ago, which was the deadlift and then the clean, hang clean, shoulder to overhead, was 225 pounds for the men was the cut line. So that basically means you probably need to be cleaning at least, 255.
To be able to do that under fatigue like that?
Fatigue, yeah.
Yeah, 255, 265.
Right. So that gives everyone an idea. And then it was 147 for the females, which is probably close to that 185-ish range, 175 to 185 range.
I'd say 175 would be probably pretty safe.
So those are things that then you could drop down 10% each time and get a feel for where your age group, where your division should be. And that's a good place to just start. Okay, I'm hitting all these metrics. Now what do I need to get better at to get into the top 5% and then top 2%, so that it's an easy walk through the open for you, and then you can focus more on quarterfinals.
Well, to that point as well, you can go and, just this past year they used just the CrossFit total, right? So we had back squat, deadlift, and shoulder press. Like, do a total, and then go look at the division, your leaderboard for your division, and compare. Figure out, do I need to get stronger in absolute strength? Then we also had a clean and jerk 1RM after the extra tall wall ball.
Yeah.
Right? So look at that. Where do you fall relative to that? Now you start to get a sense, okay, how's my absolute strength, my total, relative to my more dynamic and skill strength for the clean and jerk. And that'll give you a really good sense of where you fall relative to your division. There's also, you can look at the snatch loads, right? The snatch load, I think for my division went up to 245, right? And I think that's for most of the divisions, it went up to 245 for the men. Go look at that. If you're not able to hit that, well, that tells you that if you're strong in the total and weak and not strong enough in the snatch, well, that tells you maybe you need to work on your overhead positions. Maybe you need to work on snatch skill. So there's enough data just from last year, right? And it's always like this. You can always go back and look at the previous year and grab a lot of data. and see where are my deficits relative to the field here.
Yeah. So to kind of wrap this up, let's go back to your experience and just kind of give some feedback to the audience. Maybe it is an up and coming 35 to 39 Masters athlete, or maybe it's the 50 to 54 who's struggling with those loads. Like, what are there some like, tangible things that you would say, like, here's what to focus on now. Like, here's what I did to help them with their open performance in quarterfinals.
Yeah, I think the first off is to have good systems for competing. I think we've talked about this on the podcast before. We talk about it at our camps, our open prep camps every year. Competing well is, and especially in this sport, is a skill.
Yeah.
Right. And so part of that comes down to having good plans beforehand, right? So being able to actually strategize a workout, and that takes practice. You need to do that on a daily basis. The whole reason we came up all those years ago with the throwdowns was so that people could practice the skill of competing, practice the skill of creating a strategy, right? And so I think that's the first part. Have a system for fueling and warming up and having a plan when you show up and being intentional and treating yourself like a professional, even if you're not getting paid to compete. And I think that's probably one of the most, between now and the open, that's probably one of the things that people can do the most.
Yeah.
Is create systems for
this
yourself.
Is a plug for you because you built the manual, but we have a competitor's manual that actually goes out free to anybody that signs up for our online program. So you get, sign up, you get an email with that competitor's manual, and it's awesome because it walks you through. Like, it's literally basically holding your hand. Okay, here's what you need to think about to warm up, what your fueling should look like, recovery after, how to pace. Like, everything is there so that you can then start practicing now, because it is a skill and you need to practice that skill. Otherwise, you're going to panic on game day and not do as well as you otherwise would.
It's a huge advantage. If you're intentional with your fueling, your plan, your strategy, your recovery afterward, what you eat after, if you're more intentional than other people, you're going to beat people who are fitter than you. Like, there's no getting around that. Talent does not beat systems in the end over the long stretch. They might beat you in one workout, but you've got to recover and do it again the next week. You got to recover and do it again the next week. And if you're just more intentional, you're going to be less burned out when you get to the end. You're going to be less tired. You're going to be more engaged. You're going to have better, you're better fueled and recovered from each one better. So by the time you get to the end, they're burnt out and tired, and you're ready to go and ready to qualify and move on. I think, honestly, between now and the open, that's probably the thing that you can do and get the most out of it. The other thing is just not put too much pressure on yourself. All of us as Masters athletes, with the exception of maybe one or two people in the 35 to 39, we're not like sponsored athletes that are getting paid to do this. We're all doing this,
that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know why Denny's isn't showing up, or AARP. Come on, someone show up and sponsor these Masters.
Some Waffle House, right? Waffle House. Yes. So I can just go after every training session and get a big
There's one right across the road.
Should we go ask if they can sponsor us? Do the podcast from Waffle House from
Their waffles are really good, but I still prefer a fluffy waffle.
What is I've never had Waffle House waffles.
It's a thin, it's crispy, but it's like super thin. It's not like fluffy in the middle, but they taste very good.
Growing up, we had an IHOP, so we used to go and have like pancake eating competitions after Saturday training.
All you can eat?
Yeah.
So
nice.
Good. Well,
how did we go from like
I appreciate the
practical to pancake?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you, Kyle. That was good advice. Masters athletes, continue to crush it. And my last word of advice would be slow yourself down a little bit. I think that most people are, in this time of year, always focused on the training and less focused on the recovery. And going into the season, it's going to matter more that you have something left to give on competition day.
Especially if you're going to go far in the season.
Yeah.
The one big lesson, my biggest takeaway from the year I did team and we went to the games with the TTT team, that's a mouthful. It was simply that the season was so long. Like, we started training seriously in December and we got done in August, and it was forever. The last 2 months of training just felt like it wasn't a drag because we were having a ton of fun, but I felt like I had just been going at 100 miles an hour forever.
But you're a Ford truck man.
That's all he drives.
Does it really count if it's a hybrid?
It does count.
Okay. I don't know. I don't think Toby Keith would have.
Yeah, I don't think it counts.
I'm a Ford truck hybrid man.
But dude,
when you were talking about, like, I can't go as hard as I used to, but I can go hard one time. And another Toby Keith song was, I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm good once as I ever was. Have you heard that song? I wanted to say that.
That's it in a nutshell. My God, that quote sums up my Masters
Toby
career.
Keith is just like
a rock star.
All right, I guess I'll kick it on the
what's another good Toby
Spotify
Keith?
on my way home.
I'm blanking. I know some of his songs though.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Kyle.
Yep. Thanks,
Peace.
guys.